Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome back to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, government, politics, education, business, whatever gets our attention. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass, which you can find at CompassKnox.com, joined as always by Scott Barker, also co-founder and co-publisher of Compass. How are you doing today, Scott?
I'm doing great. The nip of fall is in the air.
Mm-hmm.
We are refreshed after a quick long weekend.
We're happy to have you back here in the studio in person.
Glad to be back. It's a lot easier to do in person than it is on the phone in the car.
Yeah, like many things.
Yes.
Well, we have several things to talk about this week. There was an interesting vote at Planning Commission on Mayor Indya Kincannon's missing middle housing plan. A couple of interesting issues at the school board this week having to do with property in Farragut and a resolution about protecting employee rights to free speech. A fair amount of concern and consternation in the community this week about the sudden disappearance of a beloved icon on the landscape, which we will be talking about. Our own Representative Tim Burchett, once again in the thick of things in Congress for some really actually history-making activity this week. We'll talk about that. And right up top, and we don't really have a whole lot to say about this, but I want to acknowledge that one of the big stories of the week was the very sad and tragic news out of the Knox County Sheriff's Office that one of their young deputies, Officer Tucker Blakely, was shot and killed during a confrontation while responding to a domestic violence call earlier this week. And that has really kind of dominated, I think, the local news cycle in a lot of ways, both the initial incident and the shooting, which happened out in the Solway community late Sunday night. And then Deputy Blakely was taken to the hospital for his injuries and died the next day, late on Monday. There have been I believe we're recording this on Friday morning, and I think I don't remember the exact schedule of the memorial service that's happening today, but I know this morning there was a procession of the body from the funeral home, and this would be at least the second, maybe the third time this week as his body has been moved, that there's been a long procession of law enforcement vehicles from multiple agencies, and also streets lined with mourners and well-wishers. And it's a very sad thing. We don't really, at Compass, we don't cover crime news much, Scott. We don't cover sort of day-to-day police news. That's really not our bailiwick. But this one was really notable because of how unusual this is. I mean, there's a lot of talk about how dangerous police work is, and I think we all understand that on a day-to-day basis. It's absolutely true that officers responding to any number of calls really don't know what they're going to be confronted with, and there is always the possibility that you're going to be confronted with somebody violent and somebody who may well be armed. A little bit of information has come out about the shooter. Well, I should say, when we say the shooter, at this point, this whole case is under review by the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, which reviews all officer-involved shootings. And so the person who was at the address that they responded to, Matthew Rose, he was killed in an exchange of gunfire in a confrontation with deputies. We do not yet know the sequence of events there, who fired on whom and who was hit by whose bullets and so forth. That is all under investigation. But certainly it is clear that as a result of that confrontation, both Matthew Rose was killed and Deputy Blakely was killed. We know that. And this really doesn't actually happen very much. I mean, there's plenty of times where police respond to situations where somebody is difficult or even violent, and there can be struggles and so forth. But officers actually shot and killed while responding to an incident. It really is quite rare. This is the first time in nearly 40 years that the Knox County Sheriff's Office has had an officer killed in the line of duty like this. The last one was in 1984. And so really, I think as much as they train for this and talk about the possibility of it, I think it was a real shock to the agency and the officers there, just because it really fortunately doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, it doesn't happen very often. A lot of the training of officers is all about doing a dangerous job as safely as possible, and it doesn't happen often. And you're right. I mean, everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but people do talk about how police work is dangerous. You never know what you're going to come up upon when you're out on a call, and I think that when it doesn't happen, and like you said, it hasn't happened since 1984 in the sheriff's office. There might be among some people kind of, well, is it really that? It doesn't happen that often, so it's easy to say. But then when it does actually happen, it's not theoretical anymore. It's real. I think that a lot of people, when it doesn't happen for a long time, it's a theoretical thing and it's kind of abstract. But when you actually have, an officer, or you actually have an officer who is dead, who actually dies and leaves a family behind, and all, then it really hits home that yes, it is a dangerous occupation, and you can actually die going out on what's just a domestic call, and or just a traffic stop or anything like that. So.
Yeah. Yep. And so, of course, our condolences go out to Deputy Blakely and his family. He was married. He had a 5-year-old son. He had only been on the force for a couple of years. He just graduated from the Sheriff's Office Training Academy in 2021. And condolences to the agency, everybody there. And I guess we don't have a whole lot more to say about it, because like I said, these aren't the kinds of, we don't do a lot of crime reporting per se, but just really wanted to acknowledge it, that this was a major event in the community, and also something that, when we talk about policy issues and budgets and so forth, of course, the Sheriff's Office just had a big raise for all of its deputies this year that Sheriff Tom Spangler really fought hard for. I think when you see the budget cycle come around again, I anticipate hearing, and this will probably still be very fresh in people's minds in a few months when those discussions start, but we will probably be hearing this again as an example, like this is why we think that we need to pay our officers more and so forth. So I'm sure this will remain kind of top of mind and probably top of the public conversation about public safety and funding and so forth for the near future, certainly. All right. Well, let's turn our attention to Washington, D.C., where we had something this week, Scott, that has never happened in American history. A sitting Speaker of the House of Representatives was removed by members of his own caucus. Of course, we're talking about Speaker Kevin McCarthy, representative from California, who has only been Speaker since January. And of course, we remember that was a big struggle for him. I think there were 15 rounds of voting it took to get him elected Speaker in the first place. And at the time that he was elected Speaker, a lot of people said that the conditions he had agreed to become Speaker were such that they were going to make it very difficult for him to be effective, because among the concessions to a quite small group, really, of very far-right, very conservative members of the House, were that any single member could bring a motion to vacate the Speaker's chair. In the past, that threshold had been considerably higher. And that's what happened, because...
Yeah, I mean, McCarthy basically put the rope around his neck and agreed to step up on a block of ice rather than a chair. So it was kind of inevitable that at some point he would make one other person mad enough to make a motion to vacate.
And that one person was Representative Matt Gaetz of Florida. Of course, he was one of the representatives who negotiated this deal with McCarthy in the first place, because he was opposed to McCarthy being Speaker, didn't trust that he was conservative enough, whatever that means under the current circumstances. We kind of use that word conservative to cover a lot of different things. Arguably, removing a Speaker of the House in the middle of a session is not a conservative thing. It's
pretty radical.
It's a fairly radical move. And so this group is maybe better talked about as sort of like right-wing radicals than any kind of conservative. But for that's a national or even international news story as far as its impact goes. But for our purposes, it's also a very local story, because it was really mostly Democrats. Now, it wasn't Democrats who filed the motion to remove McCarthy. Actually, Democrats just last weekend had essentially done a deal with McCarthy and other members of the Republican caucus to pass a stopgap spending measure to keep the government open for another 45 days. And it was that action itself that prompted Gaetz to say, no, that's not what we wanted. We wanted to shut the government down. They were mad that McCarthy did not shut the government down and use the leverage that he had there to do that, and instead had made a deal with Democrats. But once the matter was put to the floor, do you or do you not want Kevin McCarthy to be Speaker of the House? The Democratic caucus was unanimous in saying, well, no, we don't want Kevin McCarthy to be Speaker of the House, even though he had just done a deal with them. But what made the Democrats mad was that McCarthy did the deal with them and then went out and blamed the Democrats for the whole problem in Congress, which they didn't think was a fair characterization, and they basically said, "Okay, buddy, if that's the way you want to play it."
Well, it's like how many Democrats voted for him in those 15 rounds of Speaker voting in the first place? Zero.
The Democrats,
they're never going to vote for him. It doesn't really matter.
Right? They would vote for, and they will vote for, because we still have this coming week. We're still going to have a vote on who the Speaker should be. The Democrats will presumably once again vote for Hakeem Jeffries, the minority leader, but. Of course, the Democrats are a minority within the House. They could not by themselves remove McCarthy as Speaker. And so it was 8 Republicans who essentially crossed over and voted with the Democrats. Sort of weirdly, Republicans who were mad at McCarthy for voting with the Democrats over the weekend then turned around and voted with the Democrats to remove McCarthy. And one of those 8 was our very own Representative Tim Burchett, which was interesting for a couple of reasons. Burchett had been a supporter of McCarthy. He voted for McCarthy in all 15 of those rounds back in January, even though he's friendly with Gaetz. He's friendly with sort of like that, that radical wing, but he's not officially a member of the Freedom Caucus. Burchett has always been a little bit his own guy. I think it's important he thinks of himself very much as an independent voice. And he also doesn't like his vote to be taken for granted. And I think that's one thing he was showing here. He said that the reason that he did this was because he is a deficit hawk, and he has always been a deficit hawk. That is true. He has always voted against continuing resolutions to keep the government open. That is true. And so he was unhappy with the deal that McCarthy struck, and he thought it violated conservative budgeting principles, that we have a huge deficit that continues to grow, also true, and that he thinks, we just need to roll our sleeves up and deal with our problems. Of course, the problem with that is that structurally, Republicans control the House right now, but they don't control the Senate. They don't control the White House. And so, the House can kind of pass any kind of budget bill they want to if they can get enough Republican votes for it, including some things that are very unpopular, like deep cuts to social spending, to things like food stamps, and potentially to Social Security, potentially to Medicare, to very popular programs that many people rely on. They can pass anything they want. Those things aren't going to get past the Senate. They're not going to get signed by President Biden. And so I think the argument among the Republicans who supported the deal was that all that's going to accomplish is shutting down the government, which could have fairly disruptive effects in all sorts of ways, and you're still not going to get what you want at the end of the day. And so that it would be sort of a symbolic gesture that would have very real and potentially bad consequences.
Yeah, it seemed to be a little bit of a contrived way to get rid of McCarthy. I don't really think that. I mean, we're almost, unfortunately, kind of used to the threat of the government shutting down, because it's become one of those threats that get used by politicians to try to get what they want, and so what happened to precipitate this was, unfortunately, business as usual. I mean, it wasn't unusual that the government was on the brink of shutdown, and it wasn't unusual that a deal was struck at the last minute to do it. What was unusual was the swift retribution by a very, very small number of people. I mean, this is a tiny, tiny minority of the Republican Party, or the Republican caucus. So it's not like Republicans threw out McCarthy. It's 8 people threw out McCarthy, because you knew the Democrats were going to do what they did.
Yeah, there was some frustration, obviously, among McCarthy's supporters that the Democrats didn't, quote unquote, save him, because it wouldn't have taken if you'd had an equivalent number of Democrats cross over to support McCarthy, that would have kept him in the seat. But I think that, it goes to how partisan and how divisive sort of everything is at the national level now. And I do think that I think you are right that everybody has become a little bit blasé about, every couple of years when the debt ceiling comes or when the continuing resolution comes, we're going to have this showdown again. There's going to be a threat to shut down the government. Like it has, we have actually shut down the government multiple times, although never for very long. But, we're kind of used to, and then a deal gets done. That's how these things end. And that is what happened. And to that degree, McCarthy was behaving like a conventional Speaker of the House, because that's what his predecessors have also done eventually, is come to some sort of deal. And with the narrowness of the Republican majority, and then the also, sort of hard doctrinaire views of at least a small number of their members, I think what this shows is that they very much don't want business as usual. They do not want a speaker who is going to do that thing and eventually strike a deal. They don't want to strike a deal. You could talk about to what degree this is philosophical. I think in Burchett's case, you can make a pretty strong case that it is a sincerely. Now, there may be economists who would argue with Burchett's view of all of this and view of debt and deficit and how to deal with it. But his views on it are very consistent. And I think to the degree that you can say anybody's views in Washington on anything are heartfelt, they seem heartfelt. I think he does have very strong feelings and thoughts about how the government should and should not behave and how it should and should not spend money and so forth. But of course, this is also all playing out against the pending backdrop of the 2024 election, the fact that Republicans are definitely going to make the economy among the top issues and running against Biden. And so you could wonder if stoking economic turmoil is not, that doesn't scare Republicans as much as it might under other circumstances, because the calculation is that, well, if there's economic turmoil, Biden's going to get blamed for it. Who knows how much all of that factors in. But it is true that Burchett is being pretty, he did support McCarthy in January and said he wanted to give him a chance. And he believed that the deal that got done, didn't live up to his expectations. And so as far as his own vote goes, I think you could say he's being consistent.
Yeah, he's definitely being consistent. He also is, doesn't have to worry about reelection for the most part. I mean, it's one of the, the 2nd District in Tennessee is, if not the most secure Republican seat in Congress, one of the most secure seats for the Republicans in Congress.
It's been Republican for as long as there have been Republicans.
Yes, and so there's that part of the calculation. It also is a way for, quite frankly, for Burchett to separate himself from other members of Congress, because it's tough to do that. It takes, the House works on seniority. A lot of people get reelected. It takes, a decade or more to actually get to a position of power. But this is a way for him to separate himself, much like the UFO issue is. And he certainly took advantage of that and made all the rounds of all the talk shows in Washington after the vote. He was very much in demand, and his kind of folksy demeanor, I think, is helps with that. So
yeah, and in one of those interviews on CNN, he offered sort of another reason, or the thing that sort of solidified his vote against McCarthy, is that he said that after Burchett told McCarthy that he was going to pray about his vote on the issue, that McCarthy mocked him, and Burchett took offense at this and felt like, he said he felt like his faith was being impugned here. He may well have taken personal offense. I do think that, if McCarthy rolled his eyes a little bit at the response, well, I'm going to pray on it. I think that all of us think that our elected officials are making calculations based on many, many things, and that saying they are seeking spiritual guidance on them, it's one of those things politicians say. And so it's not that hard to see somebody kind of saying, okay, you're going to pray on it, fine, whatever. I mean, I think what McCarthy probably took that to mean is, you're not going to vote for me, are you?
Well, and the one thing too is actually McCarthy really missed an opportunity to mock Burchett, because he could have said something along the lines of, the way you voted makes me think that you get your messages from UFOs instead, or something like that, But yeah, I mean, you don't. You don't basically come out and say very often that no, your faith is just, you get called out on it. That doesn't happen very often, and
especially not from your own people.
Yeah, So the infighting's real, and then you've got what's going to happen next in Washington, too.
Right. Well, and so I think what this sets up is a really interesting thing where pretty clearly anybody who's going to get that position now is probably going to have to promise to be more hardline than McCarthy, which pretty much means. Of course, we'll have to see what comes out of this vote next week for the new speaker, but. It probably means that we're headed for a government shutdown. Like, it's hard to imagine that we're going to get a new Republican Speaker of the House who's going to be willing to do anything to keep the government from shutting down in mid-November.
Well, whoever it is, well, what happened to McCarthy will happen again if it, unless there's some, systemic changes that go on, and there's, kind of one of the pipe dreams that's out there is that more moderate Republicans will reach across the aisle to more moderate Democrats and get a more moderate, pragmatic speaker. That won't happen without some pretty big concessions to Democrats on, basically power sharing in the House.
Yeah, it does not seem very likely under the circumstances.
That's for any Republican to bring that up is a death knell. That means they might as well just go ahead and pack up their stuff and go home.
Yeah. No, it'll be interesting. Of course, it's very possible and likely even that Burchett will once again be at the center of those discussions next week. I think the one other thing to mention here is you talked about this as a way for him to differentiate himself and also raise his profile. One of his favorite lines that he repeats a lot is that he is the 435th most powerful member of the House of Representatives. Well, not this week.
No, this week he was in the top 8.
Yeah. He definitely made a big difference. Whether you agree with his actions or not, he was definitely a key player. All right. Well, again, we will probably be talking more about that next week because it's hard to imagine that we don't have a lot more drama to go through on that front. Speaking of drama, there was a little drama here locally this week when people woke up one morning and looked across the Tennessee River from downtown and saw the JFG sign being dismantled and removed from its position up above the Gay Street Bridge there. Scott, what happened to the JFG sign?
Well, just that. It no warning, no notice or anything. Crews showed up and just started taking the sign apart. They took it down and took it apparently to a warehouse. It took everybody by surprise. It took city officials by surprise. It took everybody, and kind of the story goes, it's an iconic sign. It's been there since the 1950s. It's been near there since the 1950s. It was at a different location at the end of the Gay Street Bridge.
Right, and this is a sign advertising JFG Coffee, beloved local brand.
Yes, and JFG Coffee has been an East Tennessee brand since the late 1800s. It's been a Knoxville institution since the 1920s, I believe 1926, if I remember correctly, when the Goodson brothers moved their operations here. There was a time when, decades really, but within our lifetime still, where downtown smelled like coffee roasting because JFG was roasting coffee in the old city. And
then there were the days when they were working on peanut butter, and so it would smell like roasting peanuts instead of roasting coffee.
But anyway, this sign had been it's an old-fashioned billboard type sign that had been at the end of the South Knoxville Bridge for decades. It was when the Gay Street Bridge was the main bridge across the river. It was, it was the welcome to South Knoxville sign, although it didn't say that. It just then it had gone into disrepair. The lease ran out with the property owner. This was in 2010. And there was a big movement to save the sign because they were going to tear it down then and then not just remove it. Knox Heritage got involved. They raised money. They got an agreement for the Corbella Shrine Temple, which is just across Blunt Avenue from the end of the Gay Street Bridge, and kind of where Blunt Sevier changed names right there. And so they put the sign there. They took it down, spent a couple of years refurbishing the sign, put it back up. It's been there since 2012. Well, the lease ran out. And this
and we
came
should
out.
say that JFG itself was bought in the 1960s by Riley Foods, based in Louisiana. And Riley Foods has a local presence too, obviously, right there in West Knoxville off Sutherland Avenue. And so they are actually the owners of the sign.
Yes. All this happened. You got to remember, this is essentially a billboard, and so it is a sign owned by Riley Foods, and they had an agreement with the Shriners at Corbella Temple to erect the sign on their property, and that's where it has been since 2012. That lease expired. The Shriners are looking to sell their property. I don't know if they were looking to sell, but people have been throwing money at them for the last couple of years, because you could put a building on their property and have a fantastic view of downtown Knoxville across the Gay Street Bridge. If anybody, listeners out there who've been to that spot up there, know it is really a prime South Knoxville waterfront location. And so they're actually in negotiations with a company. They don't have an agreement yet, but at least they say they don't have an agreement yet. They said they're still discussing terms with a developer of some sort. Don't know what they would be developing, but somebody would be developing something. So there's really no point in JFG and Riley Foods staying there. But it's still an iconic sign in the city. It's one of those touchstones that people have. Knoxville is growing and changing dramatically in some instances, like along Cumberland Avenue and part of the South Waterfront, and there are a few things that, while you can't stop progress, there are a few things that they're kind of nice to have to remind us of the past, and that's one of them. But don't know exactly what Riley Foods' plans were. They haven't talked about what they were doing other than removing a sign because the lease was expired. But obviously, just like in 2010, a lot of people are upset that the sign is down. Knox Heritage was very instrumental in saving it the last time. That organization is still they want to be involved again. And there is a broad feeling in the community that we need to we as a community need to find another place for it. And so that's kind of where things are now. The city is going to the city doesn't have a dog in the fight. First of all, I mean, it's kind of, it's a private company that owns the sign that was on another private entity's property, and they made a private decision to take it down. So it's not really, there's not anything really concrete for the city to hang their hat on there. But I think in recognition of the cultural significance of the sign, they've offered to kind of broker a deal. They've reached out to Riley Foods. They're talking with Knox Heritage. Knox Heritage has also offered to broker a deal. So now they're looking for a suitable location for this sign. It should, as far as any location is not going to be difficult. Just finding any location, because as it's designated as a historic sign, the city's sign ordinance, which was passed, I believe it was 2015, so it was after the last time this happened. But with the JFG sign in mind, includes a section on historic signs. The sign is a designated one. It's a lot easier for you to move and erect a historic sign than it would be any other off-premises sign. So, so finding a location is really about finding somebody who is willing to put it on their property.
Right.
And then the other big, and this is the big sticking point, or the big issue that would need to be resolved, as is often the case, is money. I don't know that Riley Foods will want to spend the money. It needs to be refurbished, for one thing. I don't know if they see the value, as a business, see the business value of putting the sign back up and paying for the refurbishment of the sign and paying for the ongoing maintenance of the sign. That's, I mean, obviously, over the last 11 years or so, it only took 11 years for it to deteriorate somewhat. So
right, it has a lot of light bulbs on it.
A lot of light
replaced.
bulbs, yes. So and these are kind of special light bulbs too. So it's not, you don't just go to Home Depot and get a few hundred 60-watt light bulbs and screw in up there. So anyway, so there's a lot of now there's going to be a lot of speculation. Oh, there already is a lot of speculation about where it could go. The developer at Kern's Bakery has said they could put it there if they wanted to. They have their own historic sign, although I don't know if it actually has the designation, but they do have a historic sign that used to be on top of the bakery that is in storage, and they kind of said, well, we can bring that out and refurbish it and do the JFG sign and put it on our property. That certainly could be a viable solution.
Right, and that would keep it in South Knoxville, which I think some people in South Knoxville are going to be very disappointed if the sign is ultimately re-erected someplace that is not South Knoxville.
Yeah, there a lot of folks from South Knoxville have already taken to social media to say, well, it needs to stay. So, and who knows if this the developer who is presumably going to buy the Shriners property could say, hey, we can design around it, bring it back, and put it back up, or it could go somewhere else. And yeah, they're not. It's not restricted to go to South Knoxville. The ultimate decision is going to be up to Riley Foods, and they could say that they don't need it, they don't want to fool with it, they want to just keep. They'll end up taking it to a landfill. They can do that because it's their sign. And or they could go to a property where an owner offers to do all the refurbishing and all of the maintenance, and JFG just gets free advertising. That could happen too. I don't know who would do that, but someone might. And
so the bottom line is the sign is gone, but it is also safe. It is being preserved, and there are movements underway to relocate it somewhere, and we'll see what happens.
Well, yeah, we'll look for it. I would imagine that it will not be re-erected with the stealth that was used to take it down. I think that there will be. We will know. They will bring out the trumpets and the banners when they decide what to do with it. But I think there's a lot of sentiment to actually get it done, and I think that Riley Foods has they've been in the past. They said yes, we'll keep the sign up. I think that they understand the value of goodwill in the community, and so I think that there will probably be a solution that will be arrived at, but you never know. These things can always fall apart. And one thing is pretty certain: no matter where the sign goes, there will be a lot of people who think it needs to go somewhere else.
Sure.
which is part of the it's grist for the mill.
Well, I just wanted to mention that my own favorite Riley Foods anecdote happened while I was working for the city of Knoxville. One of my favorite press releases we ever had to put out, because the Riley Foods property there off Sutherland Avenue kind of backs up to Third Creek and the Third Creek Greenway. And there was one day where a portion of the Third Creek Greenway had to be closed because of a mayonnaise spill out of the JFG, or out of the because Riley Foods JFG also makes mayonnaise, as lots of locals know. There are a lot of folks who swear by JFG mayo. And I don't remember exactly what happened, but somehow some quantity of mayonnaise spilled out the back of their facility and across the Greenway. So they had to shut down the Greenway, because you do not want to ride a bicycle through a puddle of mayonnaise. Let me tell you.
Well, no, and what there's the Duke Mayonnaise Bowl now, and
right.
in college football, where it's a relatively new bowl, but the tradition now is to dump mayonnaise on top of the winning coach. So, there are lots of other substances and chemicals that could be spilled and that are much worse than mayonnaise.
It's true. Okay, let's talk about the school board. They had their monthly work session and voting meeting this past week. Couple of interesting things there. One is they are buying some property in Farragut. They've been looking for property for a new school in Farragut for the last couple of years. Initially, this discussion was about property for a new elementary school, and they actually had property last year that they reached an initial agreement to buy for a new elementary school on McPhee Road, sort of toward the very west end of Farragut, almost to the county line. And ultimately that deal fell through because the owners of that property, part of the deal, they wanted the school system to also build an access road into the property, and that was going to essentially double the cost of the total project from a little over $3 million to a bit over $6 million. And so this property that they agreed to buy this week is on Boring Road, closer to the heart of Farragut, also just kind of off Kingston Pike. If you're familiar with Kingston Pike through Farragut, this is property that is behind the Ingalls store and that plaza. So kind of you take Boring Road off of Kingston Pike, back behind that plaza. There's a decent-sized chunk of property, about 41 acres, currently owned by Doug Horn, who's a well-known commercial developer, and also a guy who's very active civically in Farragut. He owns the Farragut Press, among other things. And he has actually tried to develop that property previously. He had two different proposals for multifamily housing there. One was an apartment complex and one was senior housing. Both of those got shut down by the town of Farragut. Farragut is generally, first of all, Farragut has its own planning and zoning. It has its own planning commission and its own zoning rules. That's the main reason that Farragut incorporated as a town in the first place 40 years ago, was in order to have better control over development and land use within the town of Farragut. Farragut traditionally very resistant to any form of multifamily housing, to any kind of housing density at all. They don't like it. And those projects, although there are some projects currently under construction there, multifamily projects, those have been controversial. These ones that Doug Horn tried to do on this property were controversial and were not permitted. And so now the school system is going to buy the property. And Doug Horn apparently basically cut the school system a deal. The reason the school system hadn't been interested in that property previously is the price was too high, and Horn came down from $175,000 an acre to $125,000 an acre, which brings it in at just about $4.9 million for the school system to buy the property. So that makes it cheaper than that property on McPhee Road once you include the access road that they were going to have to build. And also, it may not be an elementary school. And this is the thing that has plunged Farragut, and to a lesser degree the school board, into a certain amount of consternation over the past couple of weeks, because school officials came out and said that this was first discussed at the board's annual work session back in September. that, well, we're thinking that maybe that actually needs to be a middle school rather than an elementary school, kind of looking at the numbers of students they have at different grade levels and the facilities they have. And so the idea that's kind of been floated is that because it's Farragut primary and intermediate schools that are really overcrowded right now, although the middle school is also overcrowded, but the primary and intermediate schools actually have and have had for some years now a number of temporary classrooms, modular classrooms, trailers, whatever you want to call them. They're, buildings, temporary buildings outside the regular school building that students have to walk in and out of to go to class. And so that was why they were talking about building a new elementary school. But now the thinking seems to be that maybe they could move students from the intermediate school to the existing middle school, students from the existing primary school to the intermediate school, and then build a new middle school that would have more capacity, which is where they're thinking they might need it right now, although none of that has been set for sure. And that was where a couple of school board members had questions, because they were basically being asked to buy a property without knowing exactly what they're going to use it for. Is it going to be an elementary school or is it going to be a middle school? Some teachers and families in the Farragut elementary schools have also had a little bit of whiplash from this, because they've been expecting that they're going to get a new elementary school, and now suddenly maybe they're not. Maybe they're going to get a new middle school. Of course, by the time any of these schools get built, the parents who are at Farragut primary right now, if there's going to be a new elementary school built, well, their kids are probably not going to. It's not going to be built in time for their kids. In fact, their kids may benefit more from getting in terms of being able to use a new facility, getting a new middle school. But some confusion out there in Farragut, some feeling left out of the loop, that things had kind of changed without them being made aware of it, and so forth. School board member Susan Horn, who represents that area, kind of acknowledged that, maybe the way that this was presented to the community wasn't the best. But her argument, and Superintendent John Ryswick's argument, was that, look, whether we build a middle school or an elementary school, we need a new school in Farragut.
There's going to be a school.
We're going to have to build a school, and land in Farragut is very hard to come by. It's why it's taken them 2 years because most of Farragut is built out. Most of Farragut is developed already. There's only a few patches of property sufficient to the needs of the school system, and this was one of them. So school board member Jennifer Horn actually moved to defer it for 30 days because Ryswick said that at the end of this month, the school system is going to have another work session. Their quarterly. They just had their annual work session. They're going to have their quarterly work session, and that they're going to get a report at that meeting with all the options. Basically, here's what we know about growth in Farragut. Here's our projections about students at all these different grade levels. And also here's the condition of all the existing buildings there. And here are the options. And that's what's going to be presented to the school board later this month. And so Owen said, why don't we put off buying this property for a month until we can have this public conversation about, the best uses of it. And she got pushback from Horn, from County Commissioner John Schoonmaker, who also represents that district. He came to the school board meeting and said, really, you've got a good price on this. There's no other property in Farragut. Go ahead and buy it. And that whatever you do with it, at least you'll have it. And so that was ultimately what they did. The board voted 7-1 to go ahead and initiate that purchase. Owen was the one vote against, and then board member Catherine Bike abstained from that vote. The other thing that happened that was interesting and generated some discussion, Owen lost on that vote, but she won on a resolution that she brought forward that doesn't really create any new rights or change any existing policies, but it kind of brings together a lot of things that are already out there, rights that school employees have that maybe aren't explicitly, put all in one place. And basically this is saying that the school board respects and values the right of school employees, teachers, staff, whoever they are, to speak up about any issues that they see within their schools, within their buildings, and to do this either internally, raising concerns or issues to principals or administrators, or externally, publicly, coming to school board meetings, for example, and speaking at public forum and saying, I teach at this school and here's some things I'm concerned about, or writing a letter to the editor, or putting something on Facebook.
Or returning a phone call to a journalist.
Or talking to the media, absolutely. That basically these are rights that school employees have, and that they do not sacrifice their rights to free speech just because they work at a school. Of course, there are some limits on their speech. You can't walk into a classroom and start reciting George Carlin's 7 dirty words thing. You will get in trouble for that. Like, there are standards for what kind of speech you can use in a classroom and so forth. But that you are still, as a school employee, you are also a citizen and resident of the community, and you have every right to be engaged, whether that's talking to your own bosses or talking to a school board member or talking to a state representative, or, engaging on any number of other issues. Like, if you're against school vouchers, you can be a teacher who's against school vouchers, and you can go to Nashville and you can protest against school vouchers publicly, and that's okay. You can't be penalized for that by, the school system. And again, those are all rights that already exist. Those are rights that people have. But it is also true, and several board members acknowledged this, that there is a persistent fear among school employees, especially, teachers, but then even because a lot of teachers are members of the Knox County Education Association, the local union, that gives them they have some built-in protections for that. If you're a member of the union, among other things, like say you get called into a disciplinary hearing for something that you have said or posted on Facebook or whatever, you're allowed to have union representation with you. The union will be there to kind of like have your back and provide help and resources and so forth. But then people who work, whether they're custodians or cafeteria workers or whatever, they don't have a union. They don't have that kind of representation, and they're often, lower paid workers and just might not feel comfortable. And that's several school board members said that they believe that Ryswick himself wants to have, an open administration and a sense that of what he calls continuous improvement, so that if any employees bring forth concerns, that he wants to hear them. He wants to hear their ideas about how things could be better or whatever. And so several board members said, like, we really do think that is the view of the administration and the superintendent, but it can still be kind of scary for people. People can still have this sense, and board members acknowledge that they often hear from teachers, from staffers or whatever, who say, like, I have this concern, but I don't want to talk about it publicly because I'm afraid of quote unquote retaliation, whether those fears are real or not. And they may or may not be, depending on the school, depending on the administrator and so forth. So anyway, Owen, who is a former teacher herself and kind of has taken it upon herself to really be a voice of teachers on the school board, brought this at the request, she said, of some employees, and the school board approved it unanimously, just basically saying, yes, we want to hear from teachers, we want to hear from staff, we want them to feel comfortable bringing forward any concerns, and also we want administrators all the way up to the superintendent to respect that right. And so this is just kind of a reminder, your employees do have these rights, and their feedback should be welcomed and encouraged, and not made to feel that, something bad might happen if they speak up. Yeah,
it's nice to be reminded every now and then that, yes, these are your rights, you do have them, and that's fine. And you're right, there are protections that are in place, but there are also, there are also kind of ways around that. If someone wants to retaliate against you, there are always work assignments that, if you could be transferred to a different school or whatever. There are all kinds of things that it's one of those things that may or may not be because you're speaking out, but it's a reminder to administrators that, listen, don't do that. Don't do these things to retaliate against teachers. It's really going to end up being counterproductive if you do.
And it's against a backdrop, both in Tennessee and nationally, of laws being passed that really do restrict the speech of teachers and people in classrooms. We've talked about the divisive concepts laws and those kinds of things, kind of laying out things that teachers are not supposed to talk about. And those laws, the Tennessee law has been challenged by the Tennessee Education Association. There's a lawsuit going on right now basically saying that law itself is an abridgment of speech rights. And so this resolution didn't really have anything to do with those laws, but I think that backdrop of teachers feeling kind of embattled and feeling like, everybody up to the state legislature is telling them to watch their words carefully. Yeah. This is just a way of sending some support for their rights to speak up.
Well, then there are a lot of employers out there who, don't let you speak publicly. I mean, and you could be a teacher married to, and your spouse works for such an employer, and your spouse is saying, well, you don't want to speak up. You've got, if I did that, I'd get fired. And, and so they might be reluctant, but it is a way to remind people that, yes, they do have rights to engage in just engage in civic life. So.
Yeah. As the Supreme Court said in a famous court case that kind of established some of these early parameters of teacher free speech, constitutional rights do not end at the schoolhouse door.
That's true.
Okay. Interesting action at the Planning Commission this week. And this had to do with Mayor Indya Kincannon's middle housing plan, which we talked about in some detail last week. But things didn't go quite the way the mayor's administration expected.
No, in fact, it was kind of surprising what happened. Generally speaking, what this ends up being is an ordinance change. They're having to change the city ordinance to allow what's called middle housing. These are things, anything that's in between a large apartment, multifamily apartment complex and a single family house. We got duplexes, got triplexes, got small apartment buildings, those kinds of things. Allow those in certain neighborhoods in the city, the older neighborhoods inside the I-640 Beltway. Anyway, so this would involve a zoning ordinance change, or actually several changes, and those have to go through Planning Commission first. Generally speaking, it's fairly perfunctory for a city proposal to go through Planning Commission, then it goes to City Council for the actual ordinance change. So a lot of times it's looked at as kind of a routine step. And in this case, it was anything but routine, which was a little bit of a surprise, especially with the fact that the Planning Commission staff was involved heavily in drafting these changes with the city administration. But they went to Planning Commission, and Planning Commission didn't approve it. It ended up being there were several members who weren't there. There were 10 members present. A 5-5 vote. It's a tie vote. That means motion fails. And so it for now has just got roadblocked there at Planning Commission. And there were a lot of objections raised. I mean, it wasn't. There were some residents there, some Knoxville citizens who were there to speak, and some of them spoke for it, some of them spoke against it. But even the ones who were against it, this wasn't kind of the torches and pitchforks thing that you get a lot of times at Planning Commission when there's a development that local residents don't like, or they're going in or whatever. There was actually a lot of positive things. There were actually a lot of positive things said about the proposal. Probably the most damning thing is it's all well and good, but it doesn't go far enough. That was the position of the realtors. That several others, planning commissioners said that too. I mean, it was this is nice, but the housing crisis that the city and the county are in is greater than this. This is just a drop in the bucket, which I think even the city admits is kind of true.
Right, because at most we're probably talking about, the redevelopment of, what is it, a couple hundred vacant lots across all those neighborhoods?
It's not very many, and and it is mostly. You got to remember, all these neighborhoods that it would affect are all built out. It would have, or would still. It's not completely dead. We'll get to that in a minute, but it would allow new construction on empty lots. It would also allow people to divide an existing single family house into a duplex or triplex. That was a sticking point for some residents, especially. There were several residents of the 4th and Gill neighborhood who showed up, and if those of us who've been around for a while know that 4th and Gill used to be a lot like Fort Sanders, in that it had been was a turn of the last century neighborhood. Had been divided up into, a lot of the houses had been divided up into apartments. Many of them pretty unsafe. It had deteriorated over the years, and then beginning around the 1980s, people started going there, buying these houses, and restoring them and putting them back as the single family houses. And now it's one of the, it was kind of the poster child for historic preservation and in the city of Knoxville. And those residents don't want it to revert back. And so, of course, there are a lot of reasons that people will say that it won't happen like that. The codes have changed, for one thing, and another is the prohibitive cost of
those properties are so valuable now.
Yeah, it's really cost prohibitive to do that now. Might be different in a different neighborhood. I mean, just up in my neighborhood, which is the next one north of 4th and Gill. You could probably get, it probably is a little cheaper to do stuff like that.
But not as many big houses.
But not as many big houses, yeah. and certainly many of the houses don't have the historic significance and the whole neighborhood as a whole doesn't, because so many of the original houses that would be historic now were torn down years and years ago. So anyway, there was that. There was also a feeling kind of on behalf of a lot of the planning commissioners, I think, that this wasn't just thought through well enough. It hadn't been vetted well enough. Hadn't been, and I don't. There's a little disconnect there, because like I said, the planning staff's been involved in drafting this. I don't know if the city didn't whip the votes as well as they get it, because, like I said, I mean, typically this is a perfunctory step because city council has the final say. But 5 planning commissioners said no, it's not ready. And so once the vote was taken, and the tie vote was there, and they it obviously died at that point, or at least stopped at that point. Then they voted to reconsider it 2 months from now. So in December, they'll come back. One of the things the city is talking about doing, Cheryl Ball, who's the chief policy officer now for the city, was saying, well, we're going to be coming up with this was kind of the addressing the idea that it didn't go far enough. Well, we're going to be presenting a comprehensive housing strategy in a couple of months, and I think that might have played into it too, because they don't know what that comprehensive strategy is, and so somehow this plays into it and is a part of that strategy. So that will be basically everything got pushed down the road as far as that goes, which is kind of unusual, because not unusual, but it's a little surprising as well, because so many people involved in the housing industry in one form or another, from planning commissioners to developers to realtors, they have said, we've got to do something, and do something now. It's been, this is and we do have a real crisis of supply of housing stock with the growth people moving to Knoxville, and across all price points, from affordable housing for people who live well below the poverty line to people who are moving here who have six-figure incomes. Everybody's having a hard time finding a house or an apartment or a condo or whatever. And so it was I thought a little strange that this has been depicted so much as a crisis and referred to as a crisis. We've referred to it as a crisis, and there's been so much demand to do something, and the proposal comes up and they kick the can down the road.
Mm-hmm.
Now, not saying it was a great proposal. I'm neutral on whether it's a great proposal or not, but so many people have said, well, do something. Well, they had a chance to do something, and so far they did.
And interestingly, Planning Commission Chair Tim Hill, who is also a developer and is also running for city council right now, he's been outspoken about the need for more housing, and also about the fact that in his view, this kind of missing middle conversation is a little bit of a red herring, because he just doesn't think it's going to provide enough total numbers to make a big difference in the market. But he was among the group that voted against it, but was not 100% against it. Right?
Yeah. I mean, and that was kind of the thing. I mean, the people who were against it weren't necessarily against it. They're against it now, in the form it is in now, not overall. And yeah, I think that nobody who looks at this sees this as the end all be all of that. Suddenly, if you allow duplexes in some of the older neighborhoods, all of a sudden, we're going to have enough of a supply of houses to accommodate all the growth, and prices will at least stabilize, if not drop, and all that. No, it's not going to happen, and nobody actually made that assertion. But I think because this was the first major change that has been rolled out to address that. I think a lot of people put more of a burden on it than it could bear. Right. And I think that and I don't know, I think that there were some expectations raised about this and what it would do. Where really it's just a very minor zoning change. It only affects about a quarter of the residential area of the city, and a very small part of that quarter.
Yeah.
So it's not. Yeah, it's not going to be, but it's hard to get something to pass is when you say, okay, well, this is a proposal. It's going to be a major change to the zoning ordinance, but it really doesn't have much of an impact.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not much of a sales job either. So
right.
I don't know what the best sales job would be on that, but it wasn't made.
Well, I guess we'll see if they shore up their case and bring it back. All right, why don't we go ahead and take a break, and we'll come back in just a minute. All right, now we are to the Q&A portion of our podcast. Every week we go on our subscriber-only Facebook group, the Compass Colloquy, which you can join if you're a Compass subscriber, which you can become at CompassKnox.com. And we just ask if our readers have anything in particular they would like to hear about on the podcast beyond the obvious headlines. We got several suggestions this week. Some of them are things that we are actually actively reporting on right now and still need to learn more about, and so we're not in a position to provide a lot of intelligence on them at the moment. But one of our loyal readers said, why don't you just tell us how to make a drink? Because there was a period in our recent past when we put out our daily email to all of our subscribers, and for a while there, each Friday, we were including a cocktail recipe, which was a popular feature that we discontinued, partly because, frankly, there are only so many cocktail recipes in the world. It's not a bottomless supply. The reason we were doing this is that I and my wife and a friend of ours have a side business called Libacious, where we do cocktail catering, and you can learn about that at libacioussknox.com. Scott, I hope you don't mind if I use our promotional podcast to promote my other business. But
there is the matter of the ad rate that we charge at Office Points, but we can talk about that later.
That's right. We'll negotiate something. How about I'll make you a drink? Will that cover it?
Probably.
Okay.
It depends on what this drink is that you're talking about. I don't know.
So I thought we have just, of course, moved into autumn, and it is actually a good time to talk about drinks. And I was thinking, well, what are some great sort of classic autumn drinks? There are several, but some of the initial ones I thought of involve some somewhat complicated ingredients. And so one of our things at Libacious is we like to teach people how to make good drinks in their own home without needing a fully stocked bar. Although a fully stocked bar is a nice thing to have in your home if you're somebody who enjoys cocktails. So what I am going to talk about today is a little bit of a variation on a classic. The classic is the whiskey sour. The whiskey sour is a great drink. I think it has maybe been a little bit undervalued in recent years as we've moved into sort of like the cocktail renaissance over the last 20 years, because a lot of people still think of whiskey sour as something that you make using something called sour mix, which those of us who came of age in earlier times grew up thinking that sour mix was just a normal part of your bar menu, and that the way you would make, say, a whiskey sour is you put some whiskey and you put some quote-unquote sour mix in the glass. And, of course, most of those sour mixes, which you can still find out there, are pretty terrible. They have some sort of often like some lemon flavor, maybe some of that, the kind of lemon juice that you get out of those plastic lemons, along with some kind of sweetener, probably corn syrup or something.
I've got some bad memories with whiskey sours. Of course, a lot of that may be due to the amount of consumption rather than, but I don't recall the flavor being that great.
No.
So I'm hoping that that what you're going to suggest here is an improvement over what I recall from my misspent youth.
Absolutely, yes. And that is one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this, just because the whiskey sour itself, as I said, really is a great drink when you make it right. And so to make your conventional whiskey sour, we'll start there. You use your preferred whiskey, and you can use either bourbon or rye. They both make very good whiskey sours. That really just depends on whether you like the somewhat sweeter profile of the bourbon or the slightly spicier profile of the rye. I'm a little bit more of a rye guy myself, although I'm flexible. There are delicious bourbons out there. I'm by no means anti-bourbon. But so you take your whiskey, 2 ounces, your conventional drink recipe, 2 ounces of whiskey, and then you add 3/4 of an ounce of simple syrup. And it's called simple syrup because it is, in fact, simple. You can make simple syrup yourself at home. Don't buy. You can find, there's some liquor stores that will sell you simple syrup in a bottle. Don't do that. Simple syrup
sugar and water.
That's right, Seth. It's just a 1-to-1 mix of sugar and water. So you can take, say, 2 cups of sugar, 2 cups of water, stir them over medium heat. You do not want to bring it to a boil. You just kind of stir it constantly, overheat until all of the sugar is dissolved into the water, and you have a nice clear syrup solution. Let it cool. You can put that in your fridge and keep it for, that stuff will keep for well over a month for sure. So you make one batch of simple syrup, and it'll last you for a month or more of drinking. So 3/4 of an ounce of simple syrup, and then crucially, 3/4 of an ounce of fresh lemon juice. This is something we always emphasize at Libacious. If you're making cocktails, use fresh citrus. Don't use mixes. Don't use the stuff that comes in the plastic lemon. Fresh citrus is what really makes the difference. And Scott, this is probably the difference in the kind of whiskey sours that you had versus a real whiskey sour. Probably those were made with those terrible mixes that didn't have anything resembling fresh lemon juice in them.
I can guarantee you there was nothing like fresh lemon juice in what I drank.
Probably nothing fresh at all. And so that's a whiskey sour right there. 2 ounces whiskey, 3/4 ounce simple syrup, 3/4 ounce lemon juice. Put that in a cocktail shaker. Hopefully you have a cocktail shaker with some ice. Shake it up. and then pour it. And whiskey sours are one of these drinks that you can drink either neat without ice or on the rocks. That's really your preference. Drinking it on the rocks will help keep it colder and will also dilute it a little bit, which could be a plus or a minus depending on your view of things. I prefer whiskey sours on the rocks because I like to sip it over a long period of time. And if you drink it neat, of course, it doesn't stay. You either have to drink it faster or it doesn't stay as cold. But that's just personal preference. But the drink, the variation that I'm now going to introduce to that gives it the autumnal, in particular the autumnal flavor, I think, is what we call a split sherry sour. And so this is taking that recipe that I just recounted, and instead of the 2 ounces of whiskey, you just use 1 ounce of whiskey, again, whether that's bourbon or rye. The other ounce, you use sherry. And this can be Fino sherry, which is kind of like your basic sherry that you would buy at a liquor store. My favorite kind of sherry to use with it is Amontillado, which is a delicious traditional form of sherry. It has a little bit of a nutty profile that I really like. And so the reason it's called split sherry sour is you're splitting the whiskey with sherry. So you have 1 ounce of whiskey, 1 ounce of sherry, and then everything else is the same. 3/4 ounce simple syrup, 3/4 ounce fresh lemon juice. Shake that up. Again, serve it on the rocks or up, however you prefer. And what I really like about this is that it has all of the characteristics of the whiskey sour that make the whiskey sour delicious, but it adds another layer of flavor with the sherry. And sherry is a little bit of I think a lot of times people don't really know what to do with sherry. You cook with it, for one thing, and you can drink it on its own, often sort of as a nightcap or something, and it's delicious. Like I love sherry. But it may be a little bit on its own. It's a little bit of an acquired taste. Not everybody's going to love it right out of the bottle. So this is a way to kind of work sherry in with some other ingredients in a way that makes the sherry very friendly. And I think, again, it just adds a really pleasant kind of warm nuttiness to the whiskey sour. And so that is my recommended drink for your autumn drinking. And let us know if you have any other cocktail questions.
Okay, I've got a question.
Sure, go ahead.
Why didn't you bring the stuff and make cocktails here for the studio crew?
I'm afraid I second that question. I would like to know the answer as well.
I think that there's some dereliction of duty going on.
We did.
Here.
You brought eggnog when we did a Christmas episode.
This is true. All right. I accept the challenge. Next week we will have sherry split sours.
Because speaking of next week, it's fall break, so my kids will be here, so we can get good and toasty. It'll be great.
Woohoo! We're not serving.
The kids.
We're not serving to the kids.
Yes.
To be clear.
No, I'm sorry. You're right. That's for me to deal with the kids for the rest of the day since they're not at school.
Seth and I both have bartending licenses that we need state officials to know we are not serving anybody underage. Although that is actually a good segue, Seth, into talking about next week, because the first thing we were going to mention about this coming week is that it is fall break, which if you're a parent of a school-aged person, you are probably aware of. If you are not a parent of a school-aged person, you may not be aware of, and you might be wondering why suddenly half of your office is gone next week because people book trips to wherever people go on fall break. My wife and I are actually taking one of our kids down to New Orleans for about 5 days. That should be fun. So yes, we do have fall break coming up this next week, and we have a few other things, Scott, starting with a candidate forum on Monday.
Yes, the city election is fast approaching. The general election, we had the primary back in the summer, and there will be the League of Women Voters and its numerous partners. Too many to run through, especially since I probably couldn't remember them all. And but the League of Women Voters and Knoxville, Knox County, they host forums every election, and this one is for the municipal judge race in the city. And as
we do still have a city election going on. People may have forgotten, but it is still happening.
Well, a lot of times, of course, the mayor's race was decided in the primary, and a lot of people might think, oh, well, that's it for the election this year. No. we have city council races and the municipal judge race. City council races, there's going to be a separate forum for them the next week. But this coming Monday at Messiah Lutheran Church, which is on Kingston Pike, just at the foot of Bearden Hill to the west. There's going to be a forum there for the two candidates. Now, Tyler Cavanis, who's a local attorney, is challenging longtime incumbent John Rawson Jr. As we've mentioned before, this is the first time that Rawson has had an opponent since 2003. So it's
and the first time he's ever had an opponent in the general
election.
In
the general election, yes.
He's always won in the primary.
Yeah, that's one of those offices that if you get more than half the vote in the primary, you automatically win and don't need to go to the general election. In this past year's past August primary, there was a 4-person race, and Cavanis and Rawson finished the top two as the top two vote getters. So they've moved on, and Rawson did. Neither one got 50% of the vote. So they're moving on to the general election. So the forum will be there. People can come. There'll be questions from the audience. It's a way to get to know the candidates. If you if you want to get to know them better, want to show support for one or another, it's just a good opportunity to find out what their thoughts are on being the municipal judge. And the municipal judge basically enforces city ordinances. They do everything, a lot of traffic stuff. Any codes violations can go through municipal court. So it's it's very busy. A lot of people go through there. One of the things that people don't realize a lot of times inside the city of Knoxville, the city of Knoxville Police Department, when they pull you over for speeding, or when they pull you over for cruising through a stop sign, we know that you're slowing down and you think you're safe, but if you don't come to a complete stop, they will pull you over. Anyway, these things, they have the option that they can cite you to state court or cite you to city court. They usually do to city court, so you go to city court and go there. So a lot of people cycle through municipal court, and this year's contest will decide who's going to be the judge for the next 4 years, and we will be there to cover that. And in fact, the League of Women Voters scrounged around, and they failed miserably in finding a decent moderator, so they've asked me to do it. So I'll be moderating that event, and that'll be on Monday.
You were their top choice, Scott. You're the guy.
Well, if you take the list and turn it upside down, I'm on top. The tippy top.
So that is happening, and then later in the week, the University of Tennessee Board of Trustees are in action. Yeah,
they're going to have their fall meeting, which is one of the big ones of the year for them. They're going to talk about budget things, and this is the UT trustees are over all of the campuses, so a lot of their business has to do with campuses outside of Knoxville. The system is not just UT Knoxville, although a lot of folks around here sometimes forget that it's the only game in town. It's the biggest game in town, but not the only one, or biggest game in the state, I guess.
Right. It has about 2/3 of the total students in the UT system are at the Knoxville campus.
Yeah, and in fact, speaking of students, one of the things they're going to be talking about is enrollment. They just put out numbers recently. The UT system's record-breaking numbers. UT Knoxville led the way. In fact, the other campuses kind of basically stayed the same. UT Knoxville's gone up. The system has increased the number of students by about 20% over the past 4 or 5 years. So it's UT's growing. We're going to be talking about a comprehensive enrollment strategy. They've got a consultant who's going to have a report there. So they're going to be talking about that. The other thing they're going to be talking about that the Knoxville audience would really care about, and this kind of ties back to housing, is that they are going to be building 2 new residence halls. They'll have about 1,900 beds, and they're doing this through a public-private partnership. It's not unique anymore, but it's become the way that UT is building new buildings. There's going to be a ground lease. UT is going to own the land. The buildings that will go up will be owned by the company, and the company is called the Provident Group. They're a developer, and they're going to actually build, own, and manage the residence hall for the university. So,
the payment that students make to the university to live on campus would actually go to
Provident. Yes, they're the ones. They're also the ones taking the risk. They're the ones who are going to be borrowing the money to build the building, so that the revenues first go to that. UT does get a cut, but they use this ground lease agreement in order to do that. They're doing that now on their residence halls. They've got another phase 2 of the project is going to be later on next to Lindsey Nelson Stadium, and they're going to be building a residence hall there, as well as indoor baseball practice facility and all kinds of stuff. But another ground lease agreement there, and there's been talk about them or their plans now for UT to build a hotel and build a kind of an entertainment district next to Neyland Stadium, and it's going to be the same way. It'll be a ground lease thing. In fact, that's how they're going to be able to have the hotel and restaurants there, and restaurants in this entertainment district will be able to sell alcohol only because they will actually be owned by a private company, not by the University of Tennessee.
A state entity itself cannot sell alcohol.
Yes. So special. So it kind of checks several boxes for the university, this process, but that is the trend now, and they're going to be talking about that and entering into that. Barring anything outrageous, we'll go ahead and approve entering into that private partnership. Public-private partnership agreement with Provident to build those 2 residence halls. They will be, one of them is on Andy Holt Boulevard near on 20th Street, and the other is over on Caledonia, which is at the frontier between the university and the Cumberland Avenue Strip. So. Mm-hmm.
And that meeting is going to be on Friday, October 13th.
Yes.
I guess the Board of Trustees is not terribly superstitious.
Well, I don't know. They I guess are not, but we'll see. Like I say, unusual things could happen on Friday the 13th. It's Friday the 13th of October, right before Halloween.
Yeah.
Who knows what will happen?
All right. Well, whatever happens, we will certainly report on it, and we will be back next week to talk to you all about anything that happens between now and then. Thanks, as always, to Lord Seth Barber for his work behind the boards here at Barbarian Productions, and our theme music is by Will Wright, and we'll talk to you later.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.